Today we are going to be talking about bankruptcy, specifically bankruptcy or applicants that are in bankruptcy or have filed a bankruptcy within a certain period of time, and why it gives landlords pause on whether or not they want to rent to them. Now, I will say first and foremost, decide what your bankruptcy policy is going to be on the front end, include that in your rental screening criteria, and then apply it to everybody that comes across the board equally. That way you are staying in compliance with fair housing laws. Do a little research about bankruptcy for yourself as well. Make sure you understand it, especially for tenants who file bankruptcy while they are in your home. There's some very specific things you have to deal with, and we'll touch on those, but make sure that you do your own research as well to understand, make sure there's nothing special in your particular state that you have to do. So let's get into it. So why does bankruptcy make landlords think twice, or why should it make landlords think twice if you've never had to deal with it? So, there's a couple obvious reasons. The first and foremost is financial instability. If they are currently in a bankruptcy, that means they are, for whatever reasons, have been unable to take care of their financial obligations. And as a landlord, the main trade-off is you are providing a livable home in exchange for reoccurring monthly rent payments. And if they are poor money managers, or they've been unsuccessful with managing their finances in the recent past, or if they're currently in a bankruptcy, the chances of you getting paid are diminished quite a bit. So that's the first thing, especially if they're in a current bankruptcy. The second thing about that is if they have been in a bankruptcy in the last 3 to 5 years, in my opinion, it's the same deal. It is shown that they have not done well about managing their finances, and rather than take responsibility and find a way to get those taken care of, they've gone through the court system and had a certain portion of that debt restructured or just wiped out completely. And so that should be scary, because late rent can be included in that, which means that once it is included in bankruptcy, you really can't do much about that except for wait for it to come through if you're dealing with a Chapter 13, or it could just be lost forever if it is wiped out in a Chapter 7 if it's liquidated. So on that note, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy is a liquidation type bankruptcy. So basically what they're going to do is they're going to determine what the tenant's assets are, and basically everything they own, and they are going to then determine what is exempt. So if they have, for example, if they have 3 cars and it's determined that the court is going to exempt one of those cars because they needed to get back and forth to work, or however they do that, they're going to determine what's exempt and what's not. Then what is not is going to be sold, and then the proceeds made from the sale of those assets are going to be applied to creditors. Now, usually the way that they apply these is secured creditors are taken care of first, and those are the ones that have, like a vehicle, you're going to have a lien on it, or a house, you're going to have a lien on it, and that is considered security. So the monies captured from selling of that secured asset are going to be applied to that secured asset first. The thing about it is that usually the monies collected are not enough to satisfy the entire debt, and whatever's left over on the debt is usually just wiped out by the bankruptcy court. So the bad news about rent is that it is generally considered to be an unsecured debt, which means you are going to be at the back of the line on that, and there's probably not going to be enough assets to be sold. If there were, they probably weren't going to file bankruptcy in the first place. So 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to see any of the late rent that has been included in the bankruptcy. And so yeah, you're just at the back of the line. So they're going to sell everything, and then if the rent is discharged, you're not even going to have the ability to collect that rent either. It's just gone. It's off their books. Now, a Chapter 13 bankruptcy is more of a reorganization bankruptcy, and what they do is, again, they look at the assets, they look at the situation, they look at the debts, they look at the interest, and then they decide what all of those debtors are going to receive from the bankruptcy reorganization. So the court will then say, okay, you have this much in debt. We are going to force you to pay back this much, which is usually less than the original amount. And then they make payments to a trustee, and then the trustee distributes those payments to the debtors based on whatever's worked out with the bankruptcy. Now, if you have late rent involved in that, you will get at least a certain portion of that rent back, depending on what the court decides you should get, but it's going to be over that 3 to 5 year period that the tenant has to pay that bankruptcy back. So it's not a great deal. And again, it's usually, depending on how late the rent is and all of that fun stuff, anywhere from 1 to 3 months. Hopefully by that time you would have evicted the person already. But if they happen to file bankruptcy on, that rent, it's just whatever that rent is included in the bankruptcy is what will be paid back over the course of that 3 to 5 years. So what happens when a tenant files bankruptcy? The first thing that happens is that you will get an automatic stay, which basically means that you're not allowed to collect on that debt. So let's just say they owe you 2 months rent, and you can no longer send notice to pay or quit. You can no longer do collection calls. You can no longer send balance reminders. You now have to wait for the bankruptcy process to take its due course. Now, one of the things you can do is file for a relief of that automatic stay. And if the court grants it, then at the very least, you can start trying to collect on that rent again. If they don't pay, you can proceed with eviction. Now, this will hold up eviction proceedings as well. So if they're a month or two behind on their rent and they file bankruptcy and you get that automatic stay, then that is, the way that I understand it, prohibits the court, the eviction court, from moving any further until that is all decided upon. Again, if that happens, you are going to want to work with an attorney that is familiar with the bankruptcy process and get that relief of automatic stay filed to see if the bankruptcy court will kind of relieve you from that obligation. That way you can continue with your eviction process and get them out of the home. So that is an option, but again, work with your attorney to get through that. So let's talk about the best ways to kind of approach this, in my opinion. I personally recommend that you be extremely careful with bankruptcies for all the reasons that we talked about in this video. And what I would do is determine what your bankruptcy policy is going to be and put it on your rental screening criteria. So my personal criteria for bankruptcy is I will not lease to anybody that is currently in bankruptcy. That's a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13. And then I also require it be discharged for a minimum of 5 years, and that credit post-bankruptcy, post-discharge is positive credit. So, bankruptcy will stay on the record 7 to 10 years, but if they have taken care of their obligations, it's been discharged, and their credit is good, and they showed that they're responsible, because a lot of things can happen with bankruptcy. I mean, it could have been completely out of their control, and so I get it. I mean, it's there for a reason, but you need to make sure that they're not abusing this system, in my opinion, which is why I have that time limit on the amount of time of the discharge and that positive credit and financial management is in place post-discharge. So those are the 2 lines on my screening criteria. You can't be currently in bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy has to be discharged, or I guess 3 lines. Bankruptcy has to be discharged for at least 5 years, and there has to be positive credit and financial management from that point forward of the discharge. And what I find is that resolves most of anyone that's in current bankruptcy. Usually by then, they've cleared all that up, and it's no longer an issue if they pass that. For the people that can get through that, it's usually they had to file because they had no other choice, and very rarely do I find people that meet that criteria chronic abusers of the bankruptcy system. So that's how I deal with it. But whatever you decide to do, just make sure that you have that criteria listed on your rental screening criteria and that you apply it consistently, of course, to all applicants. So that is what I have on bankruptcy. Just touching on that again, make sure to do your own research. Make sure to talk to an attorney if you ever have to deal with somebody who has filed bankruptcy on you. And yeah, that's what I have. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Other than that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.